Hello my friends and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Videos. Now last week I did a run-of-the-mill Transformers comic review, sorta. It was honestly just me talking about it. And that did extremely well. So by the logic of algorithm, I guess my next video will be also about the Transformers franchise. And I will continue this up if I get more views on this one as well. If not, I'll move on to something else. Now, I really didn't know what to talk about because there's nothing that really has been happening to me that's worth talking about. I mean, Tidal Wave got a new figure, but how the hell am I going to fill up a 10-minute video of me just gushing at the Tidal Wave figure? It's going to be Titan class, it's going to be big. It has a mini Tidal Wave, which I hope becomes a mini robot Tidal Wave, but I doubt that's going to be a thing. That could combine with Megatron to make his flight mode if you have the Armada Megatron, which I do. And anyway, moving on, before that actually becomes me talking about the Megatron. So I decided to do something simple. Pick 10 characters from the Transformers franchise as a whole that I like to talk about. This isn't really much of a top 10, except for maybe like the last one. But either or, I figured this would just be an easy start for me to do a video. And the only rule I really had, except for like one character, which I'll explain my reasoning for when we get to him, they all come from different facets of the Transformers universe. So moving on, we're going to go from just this particular order, which I realize now is kind of the most favorite, but we'll explain more, go into detail. First, coming off from the movie universe, from arguably the second most hated Transformers movie I've ever watched, Lockdown. Now, Lockdown originates as the facet of we know him as a bounty hunter from the Transformers animated TV series. They brought him over for Age of Extinction as the main Cybertronian antagonist, even though we had a human antagonist and for some fucking reason Galvatron. Again, I don't want to be here all day talking about what I dislike about that movie, particularly Optimus killing a human, but as a villain alone, he was probably one of the most standout characters, in my opinion, for the entirety... I gotta cut here. For the entirety of that movie. His voice actor did really well and made him seem menacing. Most of the scenes involving him are my favorite aspects of that movie. And having him neither a Decepticon nor an Autobot really helped things out, even though the toys brandish him as a Decepticon when he's not. He's more of a Quintessonian Transformer, or unaffiliated. But then again, we never got the full scope of the origins of the Transformers species for live-action movies anyway. Moving right along, we have Rung. Now this is going to be spoilers for the Transformers IDW comic, but genuinely, the very few comics I read with him in it, he was enjoyable. He wasn't a warmonger, he was genuinely a really kind psychiatrist. And I actually liked the mystery around him, how people started forgetting about him, how nobody knew what his alt mode was, and probably the only reason why I even know of his existence is because Lost Light is one of the more popular Transformers IDW comics, especially in the latter years, considering they have been oversaturated with a bunch of characters that you don't even know who you want to care about or even should care about. And plus the plot twist around him, even though I do not like how they treated it, well, more of the concept, and I'll explain to that, is that he's Primus. Genuinely, he is the creator god of all Transformers. Now, don't get me wrong, I liked the idea, and I liked how it played out. I just genuinely don't like the whole, taking the mysticism out of the Transformers franchise, as IDW did in its later years. And I know a lot of people don't like the whole God Theos with the 13 Primes and Primus. I genuinely do, because I grew up with the Universe comics, and I grew up with, you know, all the multiversal singularities. But I can understand why people don't like it. But genuinely, I did like the plot twist, even though the concept is not really favored. But, you know, hey, it was really good. Now we're moving on to Transformers Prime, probably one of the ones that kind of hammered in why people don't like the cosmic mythos of the Transformers. My favorite character out of that entire series is Smokescreen. Smokescreen, in my opinion, seemed like he was going to be built up to be the correct Rodimus in the Transformers Prime universe, because he genuinely was trained by Alpha Trion. He genuinely did have some leadership aspects versus how they treated Hot Rod. We already know how that turned out. We got fucking RID 2015 and that show. Oh my god. Compared to Prime, it was just... God, I'm starting to speak a different language. But you like this. Anyone tries to justify actions in the anime by pointing out to the books or the video games of anything in the line continuity? Note that the line continuity's continuity is so fucking contradictory and off the wall, it's not even funny. Anyway, I genuinely liked him as a character, and eventually his signature weapon becoming the phase shifter was great. Him showing leadership qualities, and even was worried, like, him becoming a Prime, and that becoming, like, the linchpin of his character arc in Season 3, which, yeah, Transformers Prime Season 3 should have been what it was originally planned to be, was actually pretty good, and out of all the characters, I genuinely did like him. The only other character that comes close is Soundwave, but, yeah. Moving on. For the Japanese G1 continuity, we have Starsaber. Again, example number one why I dislike the IDW comics, what they did to my boy. But anyhow, Starsaber is a Japanese Autobot leader from the animated series known as Transformers Victory. He took over the leadership role after the mistake that was Jinrai, And generally, it seemed like at this moment Japan knew how to make a Transformers cartoon. Long story short, for at least Master Force, they kind of, even though I do like Metal Hawk, and I will hopefully one day pick up a Metal Hawk figure, genuinely, they seem to have turned Transformers into a Super Sentai thing. But once Star Saber Transformers Victory came out, they seemed to get their act together, or they seemed to get a writer that truly understood what Transformers was all about. And Victory Saber was probably one of the best leaders to come in that series. He wasn't overpowered. In fact, at some points he had to be saved by his arch nemesis, Deathsaurus. He took legitimate action as much was in his capabilities. When a battle between him and Deathsaurus ended up in the death of a family except for their child, he adopted their child as his son and took care of him. Generally, it would have been cool to see him as a Matrix leadership bearer, and him being called Star Saber rather than a Prime is also a fresh air aspect himself, or in this case, as they have in Japan, Convoy. And it would be really cool if we get a legacy figure of him that is free to the public and not $200 with Leo, with Victory Leo, and you had to have paid right then and there instead of when it came out, like a pre-order, or not be fucking riddled with QC issues to the point that everyone was complaining about it. I don't understand why. What Hasbro, just why didn't you make him like a Commander class release and make Victory Leo a fucking retailed leader release? Whatever. Look, I'm done complaining. Hasbro and its bullshitting practices are already enough as it is, considering they lost 20% of their workers. Hopefully one day we will get a retail release Star Saber in the US, but until then, I can only wish. Coming up next from Transformers Animated Universe, we have Prowl, coming from the loner wolf ninja archetype to genuinely, like I like about the Optimus Prime from the current comics from Skybound, genuinely caring about the Earth, which leads up to him, spoilers, sacrificing himself to save the entirety of both Cybertron and Earth from Megatron's plot near the end of Animated. Animated is beloved for a reason. There are people who still want that fourth season that we're never going to get. And the creator was an avid Transformers fan. D. Wyatt, I salute you for what you have created. Both Ben 10 and Transformers Animated has been facets for my childhood, and I know we all miss you. Moving to Beast Wars, we have Rampage. Now, I'm not a Beast Wars fan. I never grew up with the series, and to me, I don't really care for it, but I know it's loved. Now, in the comics, there was a short comic book collector's run where they did a remold of Megatron from Transformers Prime into X, which is technically Rampage's original name, because from what I understand, in the Beast Wars Transformers cartoon, he was not a Predacon, he was an Autobot that was experimented on to try to make a unique spark that ended up going haywire, making him immortal, and he became a sadistic serial killer. Now, I could be wrong about him being a Maximal. Did I call him an Autobot? Whatever, I'll keep it in and correct myself now. I'm not entirely sure if he was originally a Maximal, but the way it implied is that he originally was a Maximal. And then when he got to Earth, he ended up joining the Predacons because Galvatron essentially had him under his thumb. And his battle between Death Charge, from what I heard, was pretty cool. But in the comics, instead of becoming a psychopathic killer, he was flanked by another Maximal by the name of Transmutate. Now, I don't want to go through Transmutate's history because some of it is very weird because it was meant as a joke. But essentially, she had her own powers, and they were both seen as freaks, and they went on an adventure together, and it was all pretty much wholesome, all in all, really good, and I needed a Beast Wars representative on here, and I did not want to put the generic Megatron, because, God forbid, Megatron is probably the best character out of Beast Wars. Thank you, David K. Going on to the example I had from saying that I was only going to pick one Transformer from each continuity, well, one of my favorite villains, he looks at the concept of continuity, crumbles it into a paper ball, throws it out the window, and looks at you and go, what continuity? There is no continuity. There's only me, and that is Sideways. Sideways was actually introduced as a G2 character back in the early 90s, and they eventually brought him in as a surprise villain for Transformers Armada. Now, to try to go over Sideways' backstory is like trying to calculate the distance between Mars and the Sun, followed up by the next galaxy in line. Oh god, that's a bad, you get what I mean. Now, to my understanding of the character, he originally is a G2 character who ended up becoming one of Unicron's Thralls from Planet X, and he got the ability from Unicron to jump continuities and became his Thrall. In Transformers Armada, he became a menacing villain. Very fucking terrifying. And then he appeared again in Transformers Cybertron, where he became more of a goofball. Both variants of Sideways, in my opinion, are amazing. And what's even more funny, every version of Sideways, according to himself, that you see in Transformers, from the book and animated, from Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, from Armada and Cybertron, even how unlikely it seems, is the same guy. And just the idea of a villain that's able to go through each and every continuity and just decides to become a jokester is hilarious. And probably one of the candidates I would see to have their toy, if they make one for United, which I hope they do, we can see it get repainted because of his Minicon head sculpt into a variation of Liege Maximo, his original boss from the G2 continuity, and probably the Lokiest of all the 13 Primes. One day I would like to go down to toys and go through like the toys that we have for Legacy and go through every one of the molds to see which ones I could see that could be molded into one of the 13. But for now, that will be it for Sideways. Next we have from the Armada Unicron trilogy, Starscream. I grew up on the Armada, I grew up on Energon, I grew up on Cybertron. He had to be on this list. Unlike most Starscreams who were, Starscream, he was the least Starscream of them all. He was Megatron's one of Megatron's followers. I wouldn't say lieutenant, because eventually Thrust would slot himself into that position, but a warrior under Megatron, who Megatron and Armada had an abusive general relationship with each other. That sparked weird fanfiction. And eventually, because Thrust and Megatron only really sees their fellow Decepticons as pawns, Starscream would eventually leave the Decepticons under the pretense of trying to kill Megatron and join the Autobots. There he would meet Alexis, which he would grow to have a decent relationship with, and help him fully become an Autobot. The scene where he's talking to a Minicon on Mars, convincing the Minicon to eventually side with the Autobots, was great. His genuine care for the Minicons, since he was paired with the Starsaber, which is probably why he got paired with got the shitty accessory for Legacy, was genuinely a fresh breath of air. Genuinely, if any Decepticon could eventually become an Autobot, it would be him. But sadly, spoilers for Transformers Armada, he would eventually lose his life in confronting Unicron to prove to Megatron, and yes, I'm calling him Megatron, I don't care if he changed his name to Galvatron at that point, to convince Megatron that Unicron did exist, and the Autobots and Decepticons had to work together. And then Energon happened, and completely fucked the character up. There was some decent fan art I found looking up for pictures for this video, of Armada, Energon Starscream, in shattered glass colors, so he had Jetfire's colors, and Autobot symbols of what could have been of him genuinely joining the Autobots. And I could see during the beginning of Energon, where Energon's writing was kind of decent, where Megatron would have came back, I could definitely see Demolisher joining Megatron, but if Megatron would have given Starscream the same question, Starscream would immediately shoot his ass and proclaim himself an Autobot. Like, he is no longer a Decepticon, he is beyond his programming. That would have been great, but instead we end up with Ghost Starscream and eventually mind-wiping him and him becoming a fraud to Megatron, and then all the events in Transformers Cybertron. I might make a video of how I would like Transformers Energon to have played out, and probably come up with a different way of how Transformers Cybertron would have played out, but needless to say, Starscream, Armada Starscream is one of my favorite toys. I just wish the QC issues was a lot better on his recent toy. And number 9 on the list, we have probably, and ironically the last 3 characters are a facet of Megatron, Starscream, and Optimus Prime, but I could not put my favorite antagonist from the original cartoon, Galvatron, off this list. From G1 continuity, we have Galvatron. Now, we all know his story. From the original cartoon, Megatron was drifting through space, injured, and Unicron rebuilt him into Galvatron. What most modern interpretations of this character from TV shows don't seem to understand, there is a defined difference between Megatron and Galvatron. Megatron has method to his madness. He has a reasoning through his actions. Peace through tyranny is literally what he means. Galvatron, there is no peace. He is psychopathic. He will attack his own subordinates. He will beat them to submission. The Decepticon forces if Galvatron is the leader of the Decepticon forces would never, ever be a facet team, because Galvatron is just that psychotic. In fact, he is so psychotic that an entire planet built to fix people like him fell into madness trying to fix his brain. And ironically, it kind of worked. When Galvatron is entering the fray, it is a time of terror. Megatron might not blow up the Earth. He might threaten to blow up the Earth. He might cyberform the Earth. Galvatron would blow up the Earth, blow up Cybertron just to prove that he can. He does not care. He is insanity incarnate, he is power incarnate, and I just like him as an in-game villain. And one thing I do like about IDW is they did make him his own character, separate from Megatron, which I think is good, because modern stories on TV shows nowadays don't seem to want to use Galvatron because they don't want to get rid of Megatron, because Megatron is a facet of Transformers, and it's just sad. Like, for example, one of my criticisms of the Unicron trilogy is, at the beginning of the series, Megatron is Megatron, but as we go forward and further in the Unicron trilogy, around near the end game, he gets turned into a repaint, and that's Galvatron. The only time for me it actually worked was Cybertron, but again, I have my own idea of how Transformers Cybertron should play out. I'll probably make a video of that someday if y'all are interested. And it just never made sense. I'll just give a quick glimpse of how my mind would work on this. After Transformers Armada, Megatron would be reborn in Energon as Galvatron, and they actually did do that in the Super Link, but I'm just saying, bring that over here. And Cybertron would have had a different villain entirely, and I'll probably discuss what I want to do with that one day. Now, other than that, I do like his Legacy figure. I got the comic book version of his Legacy figure because, one, for some reason it's cheaper, even though it's his comic book version of Galvatron 2, and two, I genuinely like the figure. I did not get the Kingdom version because for some reason he had battle damage, and I don't think anyone really liked the battle damage from that line. And the Legacy version I neglected to pick up because I have my own perfect version of Galvatron sitting there on the shelf. So, like I said, I really love this guy. I hope he's in more comics. And again, did his character right. He's supposed to be a maniac. And finally, for number 1, probably the only one that actually matches my list, and that is Nemesis Prime from the Transformers Universe comic. His story, to me, was really cool, about someone being born to be a villain, finding redemption, and eventually becoming a reluctant hero. And again, I love those type of stories, hence why I like the Legacy of Kain series. I really wish I could stream that, but apparently I can't really emulate it that well. And I just like it. I just love him as a character. Now, the form you see him in right here, this is from the comics, oh my god, why did I repeat that? The form you see him in right here is the form he took in 2005, when we first got, I think it was like the very first Nemesis Prime toy we got, maybe. I think Armada came out first. And he was a repaint of a toy we didn't get before, which was Big Convoy. Now we'll move on to that Big Convoy conversation in a minute here. This toy would eventually lay down the foundation works of Universe's version of Nemesis Prime. Unicron traveled to a universe that was similar to Armada, where there was mini-cons, but the Transformers came to Earth during prehistoric eras, where Optimus Prime scanned a mammoth. By the time he got there, everyone was already dead because some intergalactic space pirates basically already swept the place, but he saw Optimus's barely dead body and saw the Matrix of leadership. So Unicron decided to come up with a more methodical plan to combat his brother than what he usually does. He took this corpse, cloned it, made a perfect clone of this version of Prime, tortured him to complete submission, to where he even liked it as reward, and then made a copy of the Matrix of leadership known as the Dead Matrix. Now, we already know what happens in Unicron. Canonically, in Energon, he gets his butt kicked by that Optimus Prime to the point where his body was completely destroyed, and eventually he was completely purged by an Energon sun, which then eventually led to the events of Cybertron with the Black Hole. Now, what Cybertron does not tell you, in the Universe comics, there was no way to get rid of that Black Hole. Even in their ploy to resurrect Primus to seal the Black Hole, there was no way that was going to happen, because the reason why the Black Hole existed was because Unicron was put out of the equation. Luckily for them, Unicron was revived, and the comics foretell how this happened. Nemesis Prime was sent by another Herald of Unicron to go inside Cybertron and to kill Primus before the Black Hole could be sealed. He was stopped by an intergalactic collision of other primes and eventually put into prison, but they never recovered the Dead Matrix. The Herald that sent him in there to do that grabbed the Matrix of leadership, grabbed the Dead Matrix and threw it into a planet to eventually revive Unicron at the same moment when the Black Hole was sealed to save the universe. So ironically, the villains did sort of save the day. Then he would go through therapy. They would put him through therapy, and eventually he would join the coalition of primes, getting a more I think it was his Alternator's toy, where this depicts Nemesis Prime as a member of this coalition. He took on the name Black Knight because everybody was Optimus at that point, so they took on code names. And eventually he would save the universe, and even being dubbed the Black Divine, which he kind of didn't like. And his whole character motivation was he was trying to do good to fix the sins of his past, and also he wanted to kill Unicron. I don't think anyone explained to him that killing Unicron would be a bad idea, and sadly the comics never took back up the story. But genuinely, I like this interpretation of Nemesis Prime rather than evil Optimus Prime, or just a bad version of Optimus Prime in those colors. Genuinely, this was a really good interpretation. And for right now, that is all I have on these characters. If you like your own characters down in the comments below, please tell them to me. I will try to do another video next week. We'll see how this video goes, and if it goes pretty well, I'll probably do another Transformers video. I hope to catch you guys next time. Please go down below, subscribe. If you watch Twitch, I am a Twitch streamer. This is where I usually use my model. And on Saturday, I'll be having my 100 follower celebration, where I'll be doing drunk karaoke, if you're interested in that, and I'll probably be doing some viewer duels for Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Vanguard Gear Days for Steam. And beyond that, I hope to catch you guys next time. Ciao!